Welcome to the Michigan Student History Seminar Series focused on hidden turning points in American history. My name is Ajay Purohit, and I'm a student at Greenhill School here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And this is a student-run initiative in which we came together with a passion for American history and a desire to bring it to the forefront of our conversation today in an interesting time. We are history enthusiasts, and we wanted to use the benefit of hindsight to examine trends and instances in our nation's past, which can often be overlooked. And in a particularly interesting time today, perhaps a likely turning point, one of those, it prompted a particularly deep interest among us students to re-examine other, maybe more hidden turning points throughout American history. And again, we have a wide-ranging audience today, which we are very excited about. We have audience members from Michigan and beyond. And today, to start off, Dr. Friedman is going to speak about some turning points in American history and his area of expertise. And then we'll have a discussion and a Q&A session between the audience and Dr. Friedman for the seminar. And during the Q&A, it would be great if you all could virtually raise your hand to ask questions, as well as turn your camera on if that's possible. And putting them in the chat should work also. I think I can see that. And before we get into it, I wanted to give a big thank you to my fellow students across the state who have helped make this happen. And thank you to everyone here who's joined us today, all of our audience. I want to extend a large thank you to the seminar's leadership team, Billy Roselle, Tui Bullock, Reza Harian, Inan Shahade, Monica Kovacs, Ashu Barab, and Quinn Song, who have helped make this possible. Thank you, guys. And with that introduction of our seminar and our aim with this event, I'll read an introduction for our speaker, Dr. Friedman, who we are incredibly excited and fortunate to host today, and then we'll get started. Dr. Friedman, who is joining us today, is a professor at the University of Michigan Law School and is an expert on U.S. Supreme Court history and evidence. He received his PhD from the University of Oxford, and Dr. Friedman serves as general editor of a multi-volume treatise on evidence, The New Wigmore. He has authored several textbooks, law review articles, and essays which are renowned from all over the country and the world, and he's been cited by the United States Supreme Court itself, recently from Justice Elena Kagan, citing in amicus brief filed by Dr. Friedman. He has also been featured on several prominent media sources, including the New York Times and C-SPAN, and won several awards, such as the 2010 Washington County Bar Association Patriot Award and the 2023 John Henry Wigmore Award for Lifetime Achievement from the Association of American Law Schools. Dr. Friedman's specific areas of interest include, but are not limited to, constitutional law, legal history, and litigation. We are incredibly grateful today and excited to have the opportunity to learn from one of the most prominent and renowned legal scholars in the United States to talk American history with and to speak with to our seminar today. So please welcome and give a big thank you to our seminar, Dr. Richard Friedman.
Thank you, Ajay. And I'm delighted to be here, and I appreciate the introduction. It went a little bit over the top, but I'm flattered. And I'm delighted that so many people have chosen on a warm, almost summer afternoon to tune in for this talk on American history. And how many of you folks are from Green Hills? It's primarily not a Green Hills group, is that right?
We have it looks like a good amount. I'd say about a little over half of us are Green Hills students. Okay. And I know we have people from all over the state, students from overseas joining us.
Yeah, I'm a Green Hills dad. My daughter Julie graduated in 2017. Now the kids went to the Ann Arbor public schools. Hidden turning points. So I've picked four I'm going to talk about, and you may think that they're not hidden so much, but I have different reasons for thinking that they're hidden in some cases, because it's sort of subtle, and in one because, gee, we may not think of the alternative ways in which history could have gone. I'm going to talk about George Washington's decision not to run for a third term. Then I'll talk about a famous Supreme Court case in 1819, McCulloch v. Maryland. I'll talk about the election of Lincoln and Lincoln's decision to preserve the Union, which was less of a given than one might have thought. And then I'll talk a little bit about a more recent decision from 1983, INS v. Chadha, which I think has had significant impacts on congressional oversight. So first, Washington. Washington was I think, clearly the greatest hero in American history. I don't mean speaking objectively so much. I mean just in the way he was regarded. That I don't think there's ever been anybody who's achieved anything close to the stature that George Washington did. It obviously traced to the fact that he had successfully led the army in the Revolution, which was in part keeping the army together during very hard times. Um, and then he became what one of his biographers is called the indispensable person. Uh, he was president of the Constitutional Convention, and I think just by that fact, he gave the convention, which exceeded its authority, he gave the convention legitimacy. And then, of course, he was elected the first president, which at a time when not all the states had decided to join in this new form of government, that in itself gave the government legitimacy. I mean, if George Washington was taking the oath, this must be the real thing. And he was elected unanimously, that is, by the Electoral College. So think about that. Electors from all the states, every single elector voted for him. There really was no opposition. Okay, and then he considered retiring after his first term, and he actually asked James Madison to draft a farewell address, which Madison did. But he was prevailed on to let himself be elected again, and again he was elected unanimously. Okay, so it's just because he was George Washington. Um, and nobody else has ever been elected unanimously. Here's a trivia question: anybody know who came the closest? Any ideas?
Reagan or FDR.
Yeah, those are good guesses, but not quite. Yeah, FDR only lost 8 electoral votes. I think it was maybe it was fewer in Maine and Vermont, and Reagan lost only Minnesota and the District of Columbia. So those are good guesses, but you got to go further back. James Monroe, running for re-election in 1820 during the so-called era of good feelings, only lost 1 electoral vote, and that in itself was, I think, somebody. It might have been the way some people vote for the Baseball Hall of Fame. They don't want somebody getting in unanimously. It might have been in part, he's not George Washington, so it was only the one. Anyway, so come around 1796, and Washington's got to decide whether to run again. All right, can I share the screen now? Yeah, I think
I
I got that
believe, yeah,
going, huh?
that setting.
Okay. Can you see that? I put some text on. Is that showing up?
I don't think so.
Not yet. Okay, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Now is it?
Um,
No?
I don't think I'm seeing it. There's a green share button
Yeah,
at the
I'm
bottom.
clicking on the green all share.
I think there,
Nothing?
no, not
I don't
for
know
me.
why.
Is
All
there
right.
a link coming up?
Old person technology. Here, Jay, here, I'll just send, this is not that important, but I have a couple of other things I'd like to show if I can. Um, uh, let's see. Here, I'm sending you an email with some text.
Yes, definitely. I can pull that
Maybe
up.
you can put that up. This
Yeah,
is from Ron Chernow, who is one of Washington's biographers, and it just summarizes some of Washington's achievements. And when I say Washington's achievements, I mean they're not personal, but they're achievements under Washington. Okay, basically, he's the number one. He had to figure out how things were going to operate. And um, so the nation was on a sound financial footing. It was militarily secure. It was economically in better shape than it had been, and it suggested that the success of the government suggested that, gee, this Republican form of government might actually work. With all that, by 1796, there was a fair amount of there we go. That's the passage from Cherno. I'll send a couple of others while I'm at it. I don't know why I'm having trouble with this. Um, here, right. Give me 1 second. Just gonna. There's one thing I'll send later. I'll use later. So, um, by 1796, there are some people who were resistant to Washington, in part because he seemed to favor the British as against the French, in part because he was an advocate of a strong federal government, which the budding Republican Party didn't like. But I think it's clear he could have gotten a third term if he wanted. Maybe it would have been unanimous again. There wasn't any organized opposition. It wasn't until September 1796, though, that he finally made his decision that he wasn't going to run again. Or at least that's when he announced it. And he announced it in what is known as his farewell address, which was a letter to the American people published in a newspaper. He gave Alexander Hamilton the draft that Madison had written. Hamilton redid it. Washington edited it himself. The address is famous these days because it talked about avoiding foreign entanglements. But he expressed the desire to retire, just to retire. He was not young. He was 64. He wasn't the greatest of health. And I think I think a large part of why he decided not to go for a third term was simply that he was tired out and he really wanted to go back to Mount Vernon. There are other possibilities as well. It may be that to some extent he was thinking about setting a precedent for others. I had seen speculation that he was worried that if he served a third term, he would die in office, and that would seem to suggest that the presidency was something to be held for life. He wanted to avoid that. It may be that he was, as he often was concerned about his social standing, and if he seemed to be grasping onto power, that would hurt his social standing among the Virginia planter class. Might have been a combination of many things. Oh, and I should add, he was not only physically tired, I think he was rather thin-skinned and didn't like the criticism he's taking. So he was sort of like, who needs it? You know, for whatever reason, he decided not to run again, announced it, and then, interestingly enough, I mean, that became really the first sort of party election in American history because the Republicans quickly caucused and picked Thomas Jefferson as their presidential candidate. The Federalists quickly caucused, picked John Adams, though Hamilton tried to undercut him. Adams won that election. Okay, whether Washington wanted to set a precedent or not, whether that was what he had in mind, it did. Adams, got beaten the next time around 1800 by Jefferson, but Jefferson only served 2 terms. I don't think he ever thought of serving a third. Then came Madison, 2 terms, and then Monroe, 2 terms, never a third. So I think a large part of it was, I mean, there's no legal restraint against them running again. I think a large part of it was 2 was good enough for George Washington. That's all we do. Okay. And I don't think there was any serious thought of anybody serving a third term until Ulysses Grant, who was elected in 1868, 1872. At that point, I don't think he seriously thought of a third term, but in 1880, he was a significant candidate for it, though candidates at that point didn't do very much, but he was interested um, and got a good deal of support at the Republican convention, but eventually it went to Garfield. Um, and then again, there's never any really serious thought of a third term. Well, you could kind of think of Teddy Roosevelt, who again didn't run in 1908 at the end of the. He had served, as you might recall, most of McKinley's second term because McKinley was assassinated early in that term, and then a full term of his own. So he'd served for 7.5 years. Didn't run in 1908 but did try in 1912. So it would not have been quite a third term. And he ran only as a third party candidate. And then, of course, we had Franklin Roosevelt, who ran for a third term in what he was presenting as sort of extenuating circumstances, because in 1940, the world was at war. We weren't yet, but it's clearly a crisis time. And then in 1944, it was in the middle of the war. So it took that long until anybody ran for a third term and a third consecutive term. Neither Grant nor TR had run for a third consecutive term. Roosevelt being enormously popular, as what we mentioned, I mean, he'd won a landslide in 1936. He won, though closer in 1940, because there was some resistance to the idea of a third term. And then what happened? There was sort of national revulsion. Oh my goodness, look at what we did! And the 22nd Amendment was passed while Truman was president, which prevented anybody else from running for a third term. Although it says elected, nobody can be elected to a third term. So could Trump get a third term? I mean, there's a way, I think. If willing Republicans ran, I mean, this isn't going to happen, but if a Republican ticket won and the vice president resigned immediately and the president appointed Trump as vice president, and then and he was confirmed by both houses, and then the president resigned. I think Trump could have a third term because he would not have been elected president or elected vice president for that matter. But that's extremely unlikely. So I do think that with one blip of FDR, I think Washington's decision not to run had a pretty significant long-term impact that we're still feeling today. Okay, so that's one. Let me talk about McCulloch v. Maryland. And Ajay, can you? I sent you a text there.
Yes.
McCulloch egg proof. Maybe you can put that up, and I'll talk some about it. So McCulloch. I don't know if you studied McCulloch in your history classes. Everybody studies Marbury v. Madison, but I think McCulloch is the more significant case, really, because it has to do with it has to do with the federal powers and the relationship between the federal government and the states. So the under Washington, one of the great debates was should the nation have should there be a federal bank established by the federal government? And Washington asked for opinions from Hamilton, from Jefferson, from his attorney general. Hamilton was in favor, others were not, but Washington went along with it. Congress passed it. We had the Bank of the United States. Had a 20-year charter. It expired in 1811 under Madison, who had opposed the bank. But the absence of a bank, it was hard regulating the economy. And so in 1816, they started a second bank. Madison, who had opposed it, just came around to thinking it was a necessary thing. But the state of Ohio passed a tax on the bank. It was for any bank in the state that wasn't chartered by the state. There was only the Bank of the United States. So the decision, the question came up: was this tax valid? Okay, and it came up to the Supreme Court, and John Marshall was the Chief Justice. Marshall was a rather domineering figure. Many of the great decisions of the Marshall Court were unanimous, and this one was as well. And he wrote most of the big decisions. Let's see. Can we go up to the top of that file?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I received it by,
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hit send. That's why you didn't get it. Okay.
and
All right. Let's see if we
load
if
here.
we get it. So there are two questions before two basic questions, some subsidiary questions as well. One was, did the federal government have the power to establish the bank? And the second one was, well, assuming that it did, could the state tax the bank? Um, and so Marshall rather predictably uh, said, yeah, wait, let me see if
I think I just received
okay.
the
Wait a
file.
minute, wait a minute. Oh, wait, I think maybe I got it now.
Okay.
You're seeing now the thing with yellow, right?
Yes, I can click stop share.
I think that's for me. Okay, all right. I don't know why I was having trouble before, but okay. Let me see if I can. Okay. Um, so the first question really was it was a great chance to talk about the scope of federal powers. I've highlighted some of the language just to give you a little bit of the flavor of Marshall's language. Marshall, when you read John Marshall opinion, it's like an unstoppable machine. Um, he wrote it just about the same time that Beethoven did, and I remember hearing once Beethoven's music described as each note seems to follow inevitably from the last. And there's a quality like that about Marshall's writing. It's like, you know, this is obvious. You can't disagree. Okay. So, all right, he points out, look, there's nothing in the Constitution that talks about creating a corporation, a bank, or any kind of corporation, but it doesn't exclude it. It doesn't say everything has to be in detail. A Constitution, it can't be nitty bitty. Take care of every detail. It would partake of the prolixity of a legal code, meaning a great big book of laws. It would never be understood. So the idea is that the great outline should be marked, the important objects designated, minor ingredients are going to be deduced. So we'll figure that out. And then this famous language, and considering this question, we must never forget that is a constitution we are expounding. Well, we knew that, I mean, nobody thought it was pickled pork or something. But what does that mean? I mean, you could say it's a constitution, so we got to be very rigid about it. But what he's saying is it's intended to last for ages, and so we have to give it some flexibility. Okay, so that's one part, and then a government entrusted with such ample powers on which the government so vitally depends must be entrusted with ample means. Okay, the power is given, it's got to be a power to succeed. It can't be their interest to clog and embarrass its execution by withholding the most appropriate means. I mean, you can see that this is saying Congress gets to choose what it needs to do. Um, it's got to select the means, and if you're saying that this means is no good, well, the burden's on you to show why it's no good. Um, uh, the power of creating a corporation is it's not for its own sake. You're doing it for some other purpose, okay? And he was a little iffy on how creating the bank would support the powers of Congress, but he said, it'll help collect taxes, it'll help quicken commerce and all this. So this is important. Then here's important language: let the end be legitimate within the scope of the Constitution. All means which are appropriate, plainly adapted to that end, which aren't prohibited within letter and spirit, are constitutional. I would have thought actually that that language in itself would have been enough to support the Affordable Care Act, because there is a question whether Congress had the ability to require people to get health insurance. And I thought, because people who weren't in the market and it's making them go into the market. I would have thought that you look at that Marshall language and you say, yeah, if the means, if the end is legitimate, and the end was certainly legitimate, and this is an appropriate means, it would have been good enough. But the majority of the court didn't see it that way. Okay, so that's one part of it, of McCulloch, was viewing the federal power as very broad and viewing Congress's ability to figure out what it wants to do as a very broad one. Put that together with a decision 5 years later, I think 5 years later, in Gibbons v. Ogden, which focused on the commerce power, the power to regulate interstate commerce, and did so in very broad terms. You had a very muscular federal government, or at least the potential of a very muscular federal government. It really wasn't exercised, that power wasn't really exercised until the late 19th century, and more so in the 20th. But it was there, it was there ready to be exercised, and I think it is because of the conceptualization of Marshall in this opinion, and also in Gibbons. Now, the second part, as I said, was how about the power of the state to tax the bank? It says the power to tax involves the power to destroy. That's, it could render it useless. No good. We've thought about this. The result is a conviction. The states have no power, taxation or otherwise, to retard, impede, burden, or in any manner control the operations of Congress. One could have come to a different conclusion. You could have said, okay, obviously the federal government is supreme within its power, but that doesn't mean that the states can't can't create an unreasonable tax. So we'll just prevent them from doing an unreasonable tax. Or you could have said that they can't create a non-discriminatory tax. They can't discriminate against the federal government. Or you could have even said, look, the states can do whatever they want, and if Congress doesn't like it, Congress can stop it. But Marshall was having none of that. Marshall was having none of that. It was if the federal government is in the way, then this is it's no good. All right, wait. I want to now. I want to show a cinematic classic here if I can. But you're not seeing this, are you?
Don't think
Hold
so,
on.
but I think if you click share again, that same button, you can then click the tab.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Sorry. Ah, give me a minute. Oh, yeah. I think this is it. All right. Do you see that?
Yes, I can see that now. I think.
Bambi meets Godzilla. Is it showing up?
Yes, I can see that.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is from about 1961 or so. Okay. All right. Why? Why did I show that? By the way, I've shown that to my constitutional law classes. Anybody want to say what's the relevance of that? Anybody take a stab? Who's who's Bambi in that in this? Who's Godzilla? That's John Marshall's view of federal and state powers. Okay, Bambi is the states. The federal government is Godzilla. Okay, there's not a lot of subtlety there. Okay, the federal government is supreme. It doesn't have to. It's not going to be restrained by the states. It doesn't have to negotiate with the states. Now, if the federal government wants if the federal government wants the states to do something for it, then it may have to buy the services, something like that. But as long as the federal government is acting within the scope of its powers, and those powers have been interpreted very broadly, in part because of Marshall, then it's superior to the states, and that's still a fundamental part of our national framework. As I say, that does not mean that the states have to help the federal government, and the Supreme Court has, in recent decades, said that the federal government can't commandeer the states. It can't treat state agents as federal agents, basically, which is part of the debate over sanctuary cities. Okay, so that's McCulloch, a landmark and really an important turning point, I think, in the structure of our government. Okay, let's talk about the 1860 election, which is maybe not such a hidden turning point because it's obviously or it might not appear to you as so much a hidden turning point because it's obviously such a crucial, well-known moment. But I want to focus on a couple of aspects of it. And can you see that map, or are you seeing a map? No.
I don't think so. No.
All right, wait a minute. Let me click screen share again. Let me try this. See, well, the Wikipedia page. All right. You see Lincoln and Breckinridge? Is that showing up? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So before the 1860 election, so Lincoln won the Republican nomination. The Republican Party, as you may remember, was new. The first election it contested was in 1856. Lincoln wins the nomination here. The main Republican platform was no expansion of slavery in the territories, which Southerners threw a fit over. The Democratic Party actually split. So you had Stephen Douglas, who had been Lincoln's rival in the 1858 senatorial election, winning the nomination of the main part of the party, but John Breckinridge winning a separate, a splinter party, the Southern Democrats. And then there was this sort of compromise type of party, a constitutional union party. Okay. Lincoln won only 39% of the vote nationwide. I'm trying to get just go down to the map. But the vote was almost all in the North, so he won an electoral majority. Here you got the salmon is Lincoln, so you see it was all in the North. Douglas, although he got 21.5% of the vote, only won Missouri, a slave border state, and he won I think one electoral vote in New Jersey. Bell won these border states, and Breckinridge dominated the South. They'd only gotten 14% of the vote of the popular vote. He came in second in the electoral vote. So Lincoln was nominated, it was elected with highly sectional result, and basically the South went crazy at that point. Was convinced that it was going to be the end of slavery. I don't know to what extent they didn't take Lincoln at his word, because he said, "I'm not going to interfere with slavery where it exists." And in fact, he really dug in on that, because in his inaugural address, he expressed willingness to support a constitutional amendment, the Corwin Amendment, which would have preserved the state's ability to maintain slavery and prevented a constitutional amendment, or would have purported to prevent a constitutional amendment from undoing that. If that amendment had passed, it, ironically enough, would have been the 13th Amendment. But Lincoln was determined to save the Union, and if that was the price of saving the Union, he was willing to do it. So I'm not sure whether it was that they didn't take Lincoln's word, or to what extent they didn't take Lincoln's word, and to what extent they felt that, and as many did, that if slavery didn't expand, it was going to be a dying institution if it didn't expand into the territories. In any event, by the time Lincoln was inaugurated, 7 states had seceded, 4 more would have. And on the eve of the inauguration, the day before, Winfield Scott, who was General in Chief of the Army, wrote to William Seward, who was about to be Secretary of State, laying out a few options. One of which was to support the Corwin Amendment, which he thought would bring the South back. Nothing like it. One of which was to fight war, which he saw as bloody and likely to be very long. And one of them also was, he put in a phrase that's become pretty well known. Say to the seceding states, "Wayward sisters, depart in peace." It was just let them go, just let them go. And there were many in the North who favored that. Let them go. We're not going to be able to persuade them to end slavery by except by warfare, and warfare would be enormously costly. Lincoln, of course, was having none of it. Lincoln was determined to save the Union. And he famously said, if I could save the Union by freeing all of the slaves, I would do it. If I could save the Union by freeing none of the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save the Union by freeing some and not others, I would do that too. And that's the last is what he did with the Emancipation Proclamation. It only freed slaves. It only purported to free slaves in areas that were still in rebellion as of January 1st, 1863. So we had this great terrible war, which of course was fought successfully. The Union was maintained, and in the end, with the passage of the actual 13th Amendment, slavery was abolished, but at tremendous cost. So it's interesting to me to speculate what would have happened if Lincoln hadn't gotten elected, or if Lincoln had not been so steely in his determination to preserve the Union. If he had taken the path of wayward sisters depart in peace, there would have been a nation in the South of the 11 states. Ultimately, I've got to believe that before the end of the century, they would have abolished slavery. I think slavery was becoming increasingly unpopular worldwide. I mean, it was, and there's much more resistance to it in the North as of 1860 than there had been, say, in 1810. I do believe slavery would have ended ultimately. Who knows how long? It's interesting to wonder. Well, would the two nations just have remained separate for eternity, or until now anyway? Even though there's a common language and common history. Common history suggested the Constitution of the Confederacy looked in large part very much like the U.S. Constitution. But would the drift apart have been so great that we never would have gotten together? It's interesting to just to compare. Let's see. Let me see if I can. Just want to show a couple of maps. Let's see. No. It's not showing a limit. Oh, I don't want Bambi meets Godzilla still.
I think I see Donald Trump and
Oh, you see Trump. Okay, wait, do you see the map below?
yes.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. If pretty close, at least close to a majority of Donald Trump's electoral votes in the 2024 election came from the old Confederacy, which is from Texas. Well, not Oklahoma; it wasn't a state, but all these states. He didn't win. He didn't win Virginia, but he did win West Virginia, which had been part of Virginia. Yeah, if you wipe that out, Harris has a clear majority. So I mean, it's just interesting, to consider how to such an extent the old division still remains. Let's see. I want to show one other map of. I'm not finding it, but if you look at where abortion is illegalized, it's obviously where there's significant restraints on abortion. It's not quite the same. There's some of the states of the upper Midwest, Indiana, whatever, but the illegalization of abortion is also concentrated in the 11 states of the old Confederacy. Not all of them, but most. So look, I'm glad we're one nation. In some respects, we would have less division, perhaps, if we hadn't. It's just, as I say, it's just a decision that maybe now seems inevitable. I don't think it was inevitable to fight the war, and of course, it did come at terrible cost. But it kept the nation together, and it ended slavery sooner than would have been otherwise. Let me just talk for just a couple minutes about Chadha, so we can open it up. The decision, Immigration Naturalization Service v. Chadha, 1983. Chadha was a student who was here on a visa and it expired, and he was given an exemption from deportation, but Congress then had what was called a legislative veto. They delegated to executive officers the power to exempt people, but they said, but if we pass a resolution saying no good, the exemption is no good. And for whatever reason, Congress passed a resolution not presented to the president, just I think it was both houses, I'm not sure, saying that Chadha had to be deported. And so he complained about it. He said, hey, wait a minute, this legislative veto, this provision allowing Congress without the president's signature to undo what the executive had done is illegal. It's effectively legislation that hasn't been presented to the president. And there were hundreds of statutes, hundreds, literally, that had legislative vetoes in them. Some of them were legislative vetoes by two houses. In other words, it would take a concurrent resolution by both houses to undo the legislative action. Some were by one house. if either house disapproved, the executive action would be undone. There were committee vetoes. If such and such a committee said no good, it would be no good. And the Supreme Court wiped them all out in one fell swoop. Well, sorry, in one fell swoop, it invalidated more federal statutes than all the decisions I think in American history. Um, uh, and among those is the War Powers Resolution, which had been passed after in 1973 in response to Nixon's exercise of powers in Southeast Asia, and it basically said if the president is going to get us involved in foreign hostilities without a declaration of war, he's got to pull them back if Congress in a concurrent resolution says you got to. No good. It would take having to present the bill to the president, who would obviously veto it, and then 2/3 in both houses to override the veto. So that's just not going to happen. So this has been also with respect to the declaration of national emergencies. This has been a considerable restraint on Congress's oversight power. I mean, as you think forward, it could be, and I'm uncertain of the full effect. It could be that Congress has become less willing to grant executive power in the first place. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I suspect not. Congress also could do something a little different. Instead of granting the president power and saying, "But we can undo it by our own, by one house, two houses, whatever." What Congress can do, and it has done at times, is to say, if you want to do this, Mr. President, you have to come to us with a proposal and we will fast track it. We'll give it a yes, no vote within 30 days. They've done that in the trade area, not a lot of other areas. But this was it's not as well known as some decisions, but it was a very important decision bearing on the structure of congressional presidential relations. Okay, I've talked a whole lot and probably too much, so happy to answer whatever questions you may have.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Friedman. This is incredibly fascinating to hear about, and looking at the maps, I think really puts that into perspective for us. So thank you. And I think at this time, I think we can
Oh, here I go.
to questions and answers.
Show the abortion map if I can.
Yes, I think we could see that perfect. So yeah, I think if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand virtually, drop it in the chat, which would be great. And I think that, we could start it off with something a lot of us were wondering about, and we were thinking a lot about legal doctrines in the country, especially in light of some legal doctrines that have been overturned in recent history. And one thing we were wondering is, have there been any, very important legal doctrines that have kind of just faded away over time, as opposed to being overturned by the Supreme Courts or the federal courts, or if that's even plausibly possible for a doctrine to just fade away without court intervention?
It's an interesting question. There's there's one that may have that comes to mind. I mean, I've never thought of it quite that way, so I don't know what would come to mind afterwards. But in Marbury v. Madison, I don't know if you studied Marbury, but it was the source of that was that Marbury was claiming that he should have had a commission to be a judge, and it had never been delivered. And so there's a question as to whether the court could review the federal the executive action there. And Marshall drew a distinction between ministerial action and discretionary action. And he said, if it's discretionary, we can't review it. If it's ministerial, just sort of almost clerical, we can. And the court adhered to that after the Civil War in a case called Mississippi v. Johnson. But after that, I just lost track of it. I mean, obviously, if the Constitution gives the president discretion, then the court will hold back. But Marshall seemed to be saying something different, which is that if it's a discretionary exercise of power, there's just nothing we can do about it. We just are categorically prevented from touching it. And I think that just somehow disappeared. It's always been a little mysterious to me how, you know. I don't know. Um, but I'd have to think harder to see if there are others that have disappeared. I mean, one thing that prevents it is, I mean, lawyers deal in history. I mean, you deal with precedents, and so if there are not a lot of cases dealing with a particular area of law, then you go back to the last one that was there, and if that's it, it's still good law, even if nothing's happened for 100 years, So they don't usually disappear, but somehow with that one, I think events just overtook it.
Great.
Excuse me.
And I see a question from Evelyn.
Hi.
Hi, Dr. Friedman. Thanks, Ajay, for setting this up. This has been really interesting. I have a question that might be outside the scope a bit, but I figured you'd be a good person to ask. Do you have any point of view or perspective on the recent executive order of federal overreach of state programs that Trump put out a few months ago?
When overreach, I have an opinion on a bunch of the executive orders, but which one in particular are you talking about?
I'm trying to remember exactly what it was called, but it was essentially an executive order where he ordered the attorney general to review climate programs across different states, like California's Clean Air
Yeah,
Program, New York Superfund, to potentially argue that they're unconstitutional
yeah,
and that he
yeah.
would remove
Uh,
them.
so an executive order is a directive to the other members of the executive branch. If the president wants to tell the attorney general, you should look into these to see if they're constitutional. I don't have a particular problem with that. Now, it's not. Does it interfere with the supposed independence of the Justice Department, which I don't think Trump cares about anyway? I don't think so because it's a matter of determining priorities. So if it's just, hey, look into this and see what legal arguments there are, I don't have I mean, it might not be my policy preference, but I don't have a legal difficulty with it. Then it's another question as to whether they actually find any legal insufficiency in the state programs, and that in itself is that substantive question is one I just don't know enough about the particulars. I mean, obviously he's going after California. I mean, anything that California does, I think he thinks is no good. But it's possible that some of the programs would be considered violating the Commerce Clause or something. I don't know, but
Mm,
I don't have a legal problem with him saying go and look at these. Okay, a lot of his
that's
executive
fair.
orders are just totally groundless as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. That was a good
Sure.
answer. Yeah.
Monica. I see a question from Monica.
Hi.
I was wondering what your interpretation of the Supreme Court ruling from July 2024 granting presumptive immunity for acts committed as president. Was the ruling unique in its granting of presidential power, or what could be the implications of that ruling?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty terrible, frankly. Uh, I think I understand the motivation, I think, or the impulse, I guess I should say. I think the court was very concerned about a banana republic type of appearance or phenomenon in which one president goes out of power, is replaced by have a president of the opposing party, and they immediately go after him for criminal prosecution. And and they were able to point to the fact that some Republicans were already threatening prosecution of Biden. You know, so they said. So I think it was this sense of, oh my God, where is this going to go? And it's going to hamper presidents. As far as I'm concerned, they vastly overrated that fear. There had never been an anticipation that the president was immune from criminal prosecution. The language of the Constitution suggests that he's not. Now, saying that doesn't mean. I mean, there's some things that the president might do that wouldn't be criminal because he's in the particular position. But say using the powers of the presidency to effect a coup, I think is not one of those. It was clear, for example, that Richard Nixon would not have been immune. At least nobody expected him to be immune. That's why he was pardoned. So you had, 240 years basically of presidents who did not think that they were immune from criminal prosecution, and I don't think presidents had been hampered or stultified or unduly fearful. So I think that they vastly overrated that fear that presidents are going to be constrained by the fear of prosecution, and underrated the fear that was right before us, which is that a president might actually commit crimes, and impeachment is not a particularly effective remedy. So I thought it was very unfortunate. And unusual. It is interesting. It got 6 votes, and some of the members of the court are hardline ideologues. I don't think the Chief Justice of Barrett are. Barrett's opinion was much more moderate than the others, and would have been. I wish that were the majority rather than the one that was there. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
That's my view. Of course there are others.
Thank you.
Yeah, I see one from Ayan.
Yes, and I believe Ayan, correct me if I'm wrong, is actually zooming in from India right now. Is that
Oh,
right?
really? Wow.
3:30 a.m. There's
Okay.
That's correct.
I got an international audience. Yeah. Okay.
So,
Show your face better yet.
it's currently like dark in the room because it's the night.
Okay.
But yeah, so you mentioned a quote by Abraham Lincoln that starts with, "If I could save the Union." And
Yeah.
when I heard that quote, like at first I didn't believe it. So I had to like search it up, and true enough, like that's what he wrote I believe in a letter to
In the
someone.
letter. Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay. My credibility is preserved. Okay. Yeah.
So I was wondering like what, and Abraham Lincoln is like one of the presidents that like we all like kind of like look up to, but like this quote, like at least for me, kind of like puts him in a new light. So I was wondering, what does this quote say about kind of like who he was as a president, and
Yeah.
also maybe like what does it say about like American history?
Yeah. Okay. So let me be clear. Lincoln hated slavery. Lincoln hated slavery from the first time he had come into contact with it in any serious way. When, as a very young man, he went to New Orleans. He was like carrying some stuff down a raft, and he saw a slave market there. He hated slavery passionately. And that is why he was determined not to allow slavery to expand into the territories. Okay, Lincoln was also a lawyer, and he was a realist, I think. And when I say he was a lawyer, he believed correctly, I believe, that the federal government had no power to abolish slavery in the southern states. It would have taken a constitutional amendment to do so, which at that point was not feasible. He also believed powerfully in the nature of the Union. So I do believe, and maybe the Southerners shared his belief. I do believe that he felt that if slavery were confined to the South, ultimately it would wither away. But he felt that it was important in the meantime to preserve the Union. That was the precondition in a way. If the South were able to secede, then the North would have no control over it, no ability to press for the abolition of slavery. So I think it was. There's something I can't do, which is to abolish slavery. There's something I can do, which is to try to preserve the Union. As the war proceeded, feelings changed, and among them his, but it became more feasible to have a partial abolition, and that's what the Emancipation Proclamation did. And I should say it was controversial in the North because where did the president get the power to do this? But he justified it as a war measure, in part because slaves would be freed and it would cripple the Southern war effort and would provide an incentive to them, and they would join the Union forces, which happened to some extent. So he justified the Emancipation Proclamation as a war measure, and then at the towards the end of his life, he strongly supported the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. By the way, the movie Lincoln is about that, about his work in support of the 13th Amendment. The president has no formal role in the adoption of constitutional amendments, but he pushed hard for it, and he actually signed it before it went to the states. The president has no need to sign a constitutional amendment, but there's no doubt that he wanted slavery abolished. It didn't become feasible to have a full abolition of slavery until the end of the Civil War. It's amazing how quickly things can change at times. If you look at old pictures from, say, 1858, nobody has a beard. Okay, take a trivial example. If you look at 1860, 1861, Lincoln, everybody, they have beards, facial hair, and all that. That's a matter of fashion. Boom. But I'll give you a modern example. Maybe it's time has moved so quickly. This may even seem quaint to you, but around 2000, let's say 1995, nobody, let's say 1995, 1990, pretty much nobody thought same-sex marriage was a serious possibility. It was sort of a joke. And by 2015, it was the constitutionally required law of the land. Things change very quickly, and sometimes in war, things change very quickly, and attitudes on slavery change very quickly during the Civil War. What began as a war to save the Union, by the end, was in part a war to end slavery.
Thank you, Dr. Friedman. And I think we have some time for a couple last minute questions. Ashu, I see you have one.
Yes, I'm a shoe. I just had a quick question, and I think that you've been kind of like touching on this throughout the seminar, but with your expertise on constitutional law, I was wondering how you believe there's a balance between historical research and modern constitutional application, and how you, if like what you believe on how original meaning should be balanced or limited with how courts apply these principles.
Yeah. That's a big question. So some scholars, some judges, some justices believe that original meaning, whatever that means, is all that you have to determine, and that's it. And they claim that this is a constraint on judges because otherwise the judges are just making it up and they're undemocratic. One problem with that is that determining the original meaning isn't always that easy. Another problem is that over time, whatever the original meaning is, we drift away from it. In other words, I think, for instance, the commerce power has come to mean a lot more than was thought at the time of the founding. But we've got 200 plus years of history of interpreting it, and I think it's sort of a widening channel over time. that with the buildup of cases and the buildup of history, things just change. So to my mind, the original meaning is very important. On some questions, it's dominant. I mean, sometimes the text is very clear. You know, two senators in every state. It may not make a whole lot of sense now, but that's the way it is. Boom. I think also that to some extent the original meaning is important just because the Constitution, in a way, was a deal that many people had great doubts about doing it, but it was like, okay, if we're creating perpetual protections, okay. I mean, think about if we were going to enter into some kind of international compact with China and everybody else, but China has enormous population. We would want to have a lot of protections, I think, and be sure that they were eternal, I think. So I do think it's very important, but other factors enter in, and one of those is just how the nation has proceeded over time. So it's an ongoing debate. I am what I would call an eclecticist. In other words, I think that the original meaning is important. The post adoption history is important. Case law is important, and to some extent, the consequences of just thinking, what is this going to do one way or the other are important. I think it all becomes part of the mix. That's my personal approach.
Thank you.
Sure.
Great. And I believe I think we can have one final question from Billy. I think your hand was raised.
Yeah.
Yeah. Professor, we saw there was an article in the New York Times the other day about Amy Coney Barrett's leftward shift in her decisions.
Yeah.
And, she was appointed. It was election time. It was the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So I don't know if you can speak to someone who the Democrats did not want in on the court, who's now agreeing with some of the liberal justices.
With some, not with all, including today, the court came down with the decision on transgender treatments, upheld the Tennessee law limiting them, and she was with the majority. So yeah, she's more moderate than many Republicans would like. This has happened more often than you would suspect, that justices drift from where they're thought to be. The most notable recent example might be Justice Souter, who was appointed by a conservative president at the sponsorship of a conservative senator, and then drifted leftward. Justice Stevens, appointed by President Ford, became rather liberal. Justice White, appointed by President Kennedy, became rather conservative in many areas by the end of his time on the court. It happens for various reasons. One is justices sometimes are on the court for a long time, and you don't know what the issues are going to be when they're appointed. Now, with Barrett, I think she surprised people more quickly than others. Another is that there's a tendency in many people to think that everything is one-dimensional. There's left and there's right and there's points in between. So everybody's going to slot in, somewhere there. Issues are complicated, people are complicated, and you'd have to have not one dimension, but a multi-dimensional array to put where people are going to line up. And the fact is, not line up, I mean just where they're going to be placed. And the fact is that at the time they're appointed, it's not necessarily so that people have an idea where they're going to be. Now, I suspect that with Barrett, look, I have a friend who said years ago, I remember he said his watchword and social discourse is whatever they're talking about sex. And in constitutional law, it's whatever they're talking about abortion. Okay. abortion has been the dominant, at least it was until the Dobbs decision, the dominant factor, and I think even since. So I think Trump and the people around him had one thought in mind: whom are we going to pick? Who's going to be a reliable vote to overrule Roe v. Wade? And she did do that. I think that was overwhelmingly what they had in mind. I'm not sure how much more deeply they got to understand her, her whole persona, her whole view on life, view on the law. So that may account for part of why she's been somewhat surprising. But I think she's still overwhelmingly a person of conservative instincts, but she's an independent-minded thinker, and that will sometimes mean that she will be with others. Does that address the question?
Yeah, that was great. That was great.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Sure. Okay, thanks.
All right. I hope you can still hear me. I think by some
Yeah.
for a minute. But barring any final last minute questions, that please feel free to raise your hand quickly or drop in the chat. I wanted to thank you, Dr. Friedman, for joining us today and spending your time to talk with us about legal history. This was really, really fascinating, and has offered a lot for us to continue talking about. So thank you for joining.
My pleasure, and as I say, good for you for so many people sticking with it and staying through the whole session doing this. And it's just wonderful, and they're excellent questions, every one of them. So, thank you,
Dr. Thank you, and thank you to everyone who has come today. Please keep staying tuned, and keep coming. And so we're grateful to all of you for joining today, and stay in touch and reach out, and we'll see you soon. So thank you again to everyone for coming today, and thank you again, Dr. Friedman. This was amazing. So we'll see you later, and we'll see all of you soon. All right.
Bye-bye.